I first saw him on a Tuesday. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and I was washing dishes in my apartment when something in my peripheral vision made me glance up. Across the street, in the building directly facing mine, a man stood in the window watching me. I live on the 4th floor. So did he. His apartment was dark, except for the faint glow of the city outside, and yet I could make out his silhouette perfectly. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't look away. At first, I thought he was just staring absent-mindedly, the way people sometimes do when they're lost in thought. But as I shut off the faucet and wiped my hands, a sick feeling crept into my stomach, because he wasn't just staring. It was like he was studying me. I stepped away from the window and pulled the curtain shut. My heart was beating too fast. Calm down. It's nothing. That's what I told myself. The next night, he was there again. This time, I watched him back. He was tall, with a lean frame, his face hidden in shadow. The way he stood so still, so rigid, made my skin crawl. I closed the curtains quickly, trying to ignore the tight knot in my stomach. It became a pattern. Every night, he was there. Every night, he watched. I stopped opening my curtains after that. It wasn't worth the unease that coiled in my chest like a snake every time I locked eyes with that faceless shadow. But then, things got worse. It started with small noises outside my door, faint shuffling, a light scrape like fingernails against wood. One night, I thought I heard my doorknob jiggle. I sat up in bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. My breath hitched as I listened, waiting. Silence. I forced myself to believe it was my imagination, a draft, a creaky building, not him. Then I started receiving messages. They weren't on my phone, not through email or social media. Number I found them inside my apartment. The first was a single Polaroid left under my kitchen counter. A photo of me, taken the night before, through my window. My stomach twisted so violently I nearly threw up. I rushed to check the locks, but they were all still bolted. There was no sign of forced entry, no way in, and yet someone had been inside. I told myself to call the police. I even picked up my phone to dial, but then I hesitated. What would I say? That I thought some man in the building across from me was breaking in without a trace. They'd think I was crazy. The second message came 2 nights later. I found it taped to my bathroom mirror. A single note scrawled in shaky handwriting. You look so peaceful when you sleep. That was the moment the fear became paralyzing. I barely slept that night, listening for every sound, heart racing with every creak of the floorboards. The next day, the third message came. This one wasn't a note. It was a photo of my front door, taken from inside my apartment. I ran. I didn't pack. I didn't think. I just grabbed my keys and sprinted to my car. I checked into a hotel on the other side of town, double-bolted the door, and spent the night staring at the peephole, terrified that I'd see an eye staring back. The next morning, I called the police. They searched my apartment. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry. They went to the building across the street to question the man in the window. But here's the thing. No one lived there. The apartment had been vacant for over a year. There was no furniture, no belongings, no man. I gave them the messages, but they couldn't find any fingerprints besides my own. I don't open my curtains anymore. I don't sleep near windows, and sometimes, even now, I still feel his eyes on me. Still hear the whisper of fingernails against my door. Still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, because somewhere, I know he's still watching. It started with the notes. At first, they were almost harmless. I love your smile. You look so handsome today. They were left on my car, my desk at work, even slipped under my apartment door. No name, no number, just words in delicate, slanted handwriting. I assumed it was a secret admirer, some quiet coworker too shy to say anything outright. I just kept on going about my business as usual. I thought that whoever this was would eventually reveal themselves, right? I did keep an eye open, of course. I hope it's that Miranda from the second floor, I said to myself. Oh, well, I'll just wait and see. But then the messages changed. I don't like when you talk to other women. You belong to me. I see you. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I told myself it was just some weird prank. I ignored it, but the feeling that I was being watched never left. Then, one night, I got home late and saw something that made my stomach drop. A photo taped to my front door. A picture of me, sleeping in my bed. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Someone had been inside. I called the cops. They checked my apartment, found no signs of forced entry. They said they'd keep an eye on things, but without solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, did everything right. None of it mattered. A week later, I woke up to a loud pop. I rushed to my window just in time to see someone running away, a dark silhouette disappearing into the night. My car tires were slashed, all four of them. The police were called, reports were filed, and still nothing. She was smart. She never left fingerprints, never got caught on camera, but she wanted me to know she was always there. The texts came next. I don't know how she got my number, but one night, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It said, "You look so tired today. I can take care of you." I blocked it. The next day, a new number. It said, "Don't ignore me. You don't want to make me angry now, do you?" Then the emails came, then the calls, then the whispers in the middle of the night, so soft I thought I was imagining them. "I love you. Don't fight this. We're meant to be together." I barely slept anymore. I stopped dating, stopped going out unless I had to. She had me trapped in my own life. Then came the night that nearly ended it all. I was exhausted, running on maybe 2 hours of sleep, when I heard it, a soft creak in the darkness. I froze in bed, listening. The air felt wrong. Then, in the dim glow of the streetlights leaking through my window, I saw her, a woman, standing in my room, watching me. The knife in her hand caught the light. I lunged out of bed just as she rushed me. Pain flared across my arm as the blade slashed me. Warm blood spilled down my skin, but adrenaline kept me moving. I fought back. We crashed to the floor, her weight pressing down on me, the knife dangerously close to my throat. She was laughing hysterically and crying at the same time. "Why won't you love me?" I grabbed her wrist, forcing it away from my neck, muscles burning as she thrashed. I used all my strength and flipped her off of me. Her head slammed against the floor. The knife clattered away. For the first time, I saw her clearly, wide, feverish eyes, her lips twisted into something that might have been a smile. I'm not gonna lie, she was kind of bad for real. If she wasn't crazy, I'd be cranking that thingamabob in a heartbeat. Anyways, I pinned her down until the cops arrived. She screamed, cried, told him it was all a mistake, that she was my girlfriend, that I loved her. But the evidence spoke for itself. the messages, the photos, the break-ins, the knife. She was arrested for attempted murder and stalking. She's been in prison for a while now, but some nights I fear she's just counting down the days until she can finish the job. It started 2 years ago. The first time I noticed him was at the grocery store. I was picking out apples when I felt that prickle on the back of my neck, the one that tells you someone is watching. When I turned, he was there, just standing in the next aisle looking at me. But it was obvious he was trying to make it look like he wasn't. I almost didn't recognize him. It had been years since high school. He had been quiet back then. One of those kids who sat in the back of the class, never speaking unless spoken to. I barely remembered his name. Ethan. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, a weird, uncomfortable one, but nothing more, until I saw him again, and again, and again. He was always there, looking, at the coffee shop, outside my work, sitting 2 rows behind me at the movie theater, always alone, always watching. I started noticing the small things next. My name scratched into the frost on my car window one morning. Roses left on my apartment doorstep, never with a note. The distinct feeling that my things had been moved when I came home, though nothing was missing. I went to the police. They told me what they always do. We can't do anything unless he threatens you or breaks the law. I told them he was following me. I told him I was scared. But there were no witnesses, no hard evidence, just my word against his silence. Ethan never tried to talk to me. Not until the night I found the first letter. It was on my pillow when I came home. The door was still locked, the windows still latched, and yet he had been inside. The letter was written in careful, obsessive script. I've loved you since high school. You never noticed me, but I noticed you. I remember everything, how you used to laugh, the way you chewed on your pen in class, the outfits you wore back then. You were perfect, but you never loved me, didn't you? Even though I was the silent and mysterious alpha male. I can protect you, my love, protect you from all the bad people. I love you so, so much, and soon I'll come see you again. My stomach twisted as I read it. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the paper. I called the police again, but when they arrived, the letter was gone. The officer looked at me like I was making it up. Are you sure you didn't misplace it? I wanted to scream. Ethan was playing a game, and I was the only one who knew. The letters kept coming, always left somewhere impossible, in my locked car, inside my bathroom mirror cabinet, tucked under my pillow while I slept. Then the messages changed. Why do you keep running from me? We're meant to be together. You don't need anyone else. I'll make sure of it. I stopped sleeping. I stopped going out at night. I installed 3 extra locks on my door. None of it mattered. One night, I was brushing my teeth when I saw something in the mirror that made my blood turn to ice. A shape behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped, but there was nothing there. Just my empty, silent bedroom and my closet door, slightly open. I never leave it open. Heart hammering, I crept forward. The darkness inside was thick, suffocating. I reached out with a trembling hand, and then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You look so beautiful right now. The closet door slammed shut. I screamed. I ran out of the apartment barefoot into the freezing night, gasping for air. I stayed with a friend after that. I filed another police report. This time, they took me seriously. They put a tracker on my phone, staked out my apartment. They promised me they'd find him. But Ethan was smart. He disappeared. No more texts, no more letters, no more signs of him. After months of silence, I let myself believe it was over. Until last night. I was staying late at work, one of the last ones in the office. The building was quiet, empty. I went to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up, my reflection stared back, exhausted, wary. And then I saw it. The words, scrawled across the mirror in red ink. I'm done waiting. Then, before I could even take a breath, the door swung open. I inherited the house when I was 24. My parents had lived here for decades before they died, and even though I had the option to sell, I couldn't bring myself to do it. The house was old, creaky, and too big for just me, but it was home. At least, I wanted it to be. From the very first night, I knew something was off. It started small, items moving when I knew I hadn't touched them. A mug I left on the coffee table would be in the sink the next morning. My keys, always on the hook by the door, would end up on the kitchen counter. I blamed myself. Maybe I was absent-minded. Maybe grief was playing tricks on me. But then came the noises, soft scuffling in the walls, a faint thump from the attic. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, not in the hallway, but inside the walls. I told myself it was mice, maybe raccoons. Houses settle, pipes groan. It was all normal. But the years passed, and things only got worse. One winter, I woke up to find all the kitchen cabinets open, every single one. Another time, my bedroom door slammed shut on its own so hard that a picture fell off the wall. One night, I heard the floorboards creak outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting, straining my ears. Silence. Then, a quiet shuffle. I nearly called out, thinking maybe a stray animal had somehow gotten inside. But something told me not to make a sound. I sat in bed, frozen, my heart hammering. After a long moment, the sound faded. I started locking my bedroom door at night. Then, last week, I found something that made my stomach drop. I was cleaning out the storage room, a space I rarely use, when I noticed something odd. The floor vent near the wall was loose. The screws were missing. Curious, I pulled it open. Inside was a small pile of wrappers, crumpled food packaging, empty water bottles, a nest of blankets, and worse, a Polaroid of me, sleeping. There were more Polaroids, but I won't disclose what the content of those were. Let's just say it was my worst nightmare come true. My hands trembled as I stared at the pictures. They weren't old. They were yellowed with age. It was recent. I called the police immediately. They searched the house, but found nothing. Said it must have been an old hiding spot from years ago, maybe even from before my parents owned the house. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been living there, hiding, watching. That brings me to tonight. I went to bed early, exhausted from weeks of barely sleeping. I triple-checked the locks, left the kitchen light on. My heart still wouldn't settle. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a cough, a deep, raspy cough. I bolted upright, my pulse hammering. It wasn't outside. It wasn't from the street. It was inside my room. The air went still. I turned my head, slow, terrified, toward my closet. The door was open. I always keep it closed. And then from the darkness inside, a footstep. I lunged for the lamp, hand shaking as I flicked it on. Light flooded the room, and there, standing in my closet, his body half hidden behind my clothes, was a man. Dirty, thin, eyes wide and unblinking. I opened my mouth to scream, but he moved fast. I barely had time to react before he lunged at me. I scrambled out of bed, my foot catching on the sheets. He grabbed my wrist before I could run, his grip bony and too strong. "Finally!" he screamed. His breath was hot and sour against my face. I struggled, kicking, clawing at his arm. I twisted hard, breaking free, and sprinted for the door. He chased me. I felt his fingers graze my hair as I threw open the bedroom door and bolted down the hall. My heart slammed against my ribs as I ran for the front door, nearly tripping over the rug. I didn't dare look back. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. Just as I got the door open, something yanked me back. Pain exploded across my scalp as he grabbed my hair, dragging me back inside. I swung my elbow wildly, connecting with his ribs. He grunted and loosened his grip. That was my chance. I shoved him with everything I had, sending him stumbling backward. I ran out the door, down the driveway, screaming for help. The neighbors heard. The police came. They found him hiding in the crawl space. He had been there for years, watching me, living inside my walls, surviving off whatever food I left behind, slipping out at night while I slept, sneaking through the rooms like a ghost. They took him away in handcuffs. I don't live there anymore. I don't sleep well anymore either, because sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear that cough, and I don't know if it's just in my head or if someone, somewhere, is still watching. I should have never gone on that trip. I should have listened to my gut and stayed home. Now, I'm the only one left. The others, they're gone, and I know it's still out there. It started as a simple camping trip. Me, and for privacy reasons, let's just say my friends are called Jake, Ryan, and Dylan. We had been friends for years, always up for an adventure. Dylan found this remote spot deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. No people, no distractions, just us and the wild, he had said. It sounded perfect at the time. We hiked in for a while, eventually setting up camp in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, the wind whispering softly through the trees. As the sun set, we sat around the fire, joking, drinking, and reminiscing. It felt like old times. But then, as the fire burned low and the night grew still, we heard it. A child's cry. It was distant, just beyond the trees. A small, pitiful voice, barely audible. "Help, please, help me." We froze. My skin prickled, my stomach twisted. What the hell was a child doing this deep in the woods? Ryan stood up first. "Did you hear that?" Jake grabbed his flashlight. "That sounded like a kid, right?" Dylan frowned. "No way. It's the middle of nowhere." But then the voice came again, closer this time. A whimpering sob, like a child too weak to keep crying. Only it sounded exactly the same as last time. I felt sick. Something was wrong. Everything in me screamed, "Don't go." But Ryan was already heading toward the trees. Jake followed without hesitation. Dylan hesitated, glancing at me. "Dude, what if it's real?" he said. I shook my head. "It doesn't make sense. How would a kid get all the way out here?" The crying came again. Dylan cursed under his breath. "We can't just leave a kid out there." And just like that, I was alone. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, heart pounding. Minutes passed, then more. The woods were dead silent now. No voices, no footsteps, just emptiness. Then, snap, a twig breaking, close. I shot up, swinging my flashlight toward the trees. "Jake?" My voice came out shaky. "Ryan? Dylan?" Silence. Then movement, a shape emerging from the darkness. My heart leapt. Dylan! But something was wrong. He stood at the edge of the firelight, motionless, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His clothes were torn. His arms hung limply at his sides. "Dylan?" I said. He took a slow step forward into the light. That's when I saw it. His eyes were wrong, dark, hollow, and his mouth was too wide, stretching in a way no human mouth should. Then he grinned. I stumbled backward, choking on my breath. My flashlight flickered. And then he spoke, not in his voice. It was the child's voice. "Help me, please." My body locked up in terror. That wasn't Dylan. That thing was wearing his skin. Then it moved, not walked, not ran. It jerked toward me inhumanly fast, limbs twitching, mouth still stretched in that grotesque grin. I ran. I didn't grab my bag. I didn't grab anything. I just ran, blindly crashing through the trees. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. I could hear it behind me, branches snapping, something rustling through the leaves, keeping pace with me effortlessly. Then I heard something worse, laughter, not just one voice, 3. The voices of Jake, Ryan, and Dylan, all laughing, all speaking in perfect unison. "Why are you running?" I nearly tripped over my own feet, my vision blurred with panic. That thing wasn't just imitating a child, it had taken them. I don't think I've ever ran that fast before in my life. Somehow, I made it back to the car. I didn't think. I jumped in, locked the doors, and tore down the dirt road so fast I nearly lost control. I didn't stop driving until I saw streetlights. I called the police. Search teams went out. They found our campsite. The fire was still burning when they got there, but there was no trace of Jake, no trace of Ryan, no trace of Dylan. They never found them. I could never tell people the full story. They wouldn't believe me. It's been weeks now. I don't sleep anymore. When I close my eyes, I see Dylan's face. That grin, that thing. It has traumatized me for life. Solo camping has always been my escape. Just me, the wilderness, and the quiet hum of my metal detector. There's something peaceful about it. The isolation, the thrill of discovery. That's why I found myself deep in Black Hollow Forest, miles from the nearest road, setting up my tent as the sun dipped behind the trees. The forest was untouched, a perfect spot for treasure hunting. Old settlements had once been here, long abandoned, leaving behind the occasional coin, tool, or relic buried beneath the earth. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. As the fire crackled, I pulled out my detector and swept it across the clearing. The soft beep of iron scraps and old nails wasn't surprising, but then a strong signal, deep, solid, different. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my trowel and started digging. The soil was packed tight, resisting me as if it didn't want to be disturbed. After about 2 feet down, my fingers scraped against something hard, not metal, something smooth. I switched on my flashlight and peered into the hole. Teeth, a row of human teeth, I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. My first thought was animal remains, maybe a hunter's buried kill. But as I brushed away more dirt, I saw the shape of a face staring back at me. A human face. My stomach twisted. I had been hoping to find old relics, not a grave. I should have stopped there. I should have walked away. But something made me keep digging. The body was fresh. The bones weren't old and brittle. They were still wrapped in decaying flesh and clothes. The smell hit me thick and rancid, making my head spin. And then I saw the hands. They weren't curled up like a corpse that had been laid to rest. They were clawing at the dirt, fingers bent and broken, as if whoever this was had tried to crawl their way out. My chest tightened. This person hadn't been buried. They had been alive when they went into the ground. Panic surged through me. I scrambled backward, kicking up dirt. I needed to call the police, get out of these woods. And then my metal detector beeped again, loud, urgent. I turned, scanning the area just beside the first grave. Another signal, another body, then another and another. 6 in total. My hands trembled. This wasn't some old burial site. Someone had been using these woods as a dumping ground. And recently, a sound echoed through the trees, a twig snapping. I froze. I wasn't alone. The fire cast flickering shadows through the trees, but I couldn't see anyone. The forest was silent. Too silent. Then the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the darkness beyond the firelight. I grabbed my metal detector like a weapon, scanning the trees. "Who's there?" My voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. No answer. Then a voice, low, amused. "You weren't supposed to find that." The breath in my lungs turned to ice. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my face, my boots slipping on the uneven ground. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. The footsteps followed, fast, gaining on me. Then, out of nowhere, a hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed, swinging wildly. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, but no one was there. The hand was gone. My pulse pounded in my ears. The air felt thick, suffocating. The only sound was the frantic heaving of my own breath. And then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of my firelight, still, motionless, watching. I knew then that I wouldn't make it back to camp. If I turned my back, if I blinked, I'd end up just like them, buried, forgotten. I did the only thing I could. I dropped everything and ran toward the road. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't exist. The woods stretched on forever, an endless nightmare. But somehow, I made it. I stumbled onto the highway, collapsed onto the pavement, and screamed for help. The police found my camp the next morning, but the bodies? Gone. No graves, no signs of digging, nothing. They found my metal detector, my gear, my tent, but no evidence of what I saw. They didn't believe me. I left town after that, moved to the city, haven't gone camping since. I didn't even want my metal detector back. Boris and I had been friends since high school. He was a giant of a man, 6 feet 5 inches, built like a bulldozer, and strong enough to lift a grown man off the ground without breaking a sweat. Despite his intimidating size, he was the kindest person I knew. We'd spent our teenage years getting into all kinds of trouble, but life had taken us in different directions. When he suggested a weekend camping trip to relive old times, I jumped at the chance. We drove deep into the woods, past where the roads turned into dirt trails. The plan was simple: hike a few miles in, set up camp, and spend the weekend reminiscing. As the sun dipped behind the trees, we pitched our tent, near a quiet, secluded clearing. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and a gentle breeze rustled the branches above. As night fell, we sat around the fire, cracking open a couple of beers and swapping stories. Remember that time we tried to break into the old school at night, and you got stuck in the window? Boris chuckled, his deep voice echoing in the darkness. I laughed, shaking my head. Yeah, and you had to pull me out. You nearly ripped my pants off. The laughter faded, and we sat in a comfortable silence, staring at the flames. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle in the bushes. Then something changed. The forest around us grew unnervingly quiet. The insects stopped chirping. The wind died down. The only sound was the crackling fire between us. Boris frowned and turned his head slightly. You hear that? I strained my ears. At first, I heard nothing, but then soft, deliberate footsteps in the distance. Not the random rustling of a small animal, but the slow, measured steps of something watching us. My voice trembled. Probably just a deer. Boris didn't look convinced. He reached for his flashlight and shone it into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the skeletal branches swaying in the dim light. But there was nothing there. A few minutes passed, and the noises stopped. The unease lingered, but we brushed it off, blaming our overactive imaginations. We eventually crawled into the tent, zipping ourselves inside for the night. I woke up sometime after midnight, heart hammering. Something was off. The tent was silent, but there was a presence, a suffocating weight pressing down on the air. Then I heard it, a whisper, not from outside the tent, but inside. Boris? I said, barely able to breathe. No response. Then I felt it, a shift in the air, a presence looming over me in the darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight with shaking hands, but before I could turn it on, Boris gasped awake with a deep, guttural breath. He shot up, nearly tearing the tent open. Something was in here. His voice was raw, panicked. I had never seen him afraid before. We scrambled out of the tent, gasping for fresh air. The fire had long since burned out, leaving us in complete darkness. But the woods were no longer silent. The footsteps were back, closer, surrounding us. Then we saw it. Just beyond the tree line, a tall, gaunt figure stood motionless. It was impossibly thin, its limbs elongated, its skin stretched tight over its bones like old leather. Its eyes, two hollow pits of blackness, were locked onto us. Boris cursed under his breath. We need to leave, now. We grabbed our backpacks and started toward the trail, but the moment we moved, the figure took a step forward. The crunch of twigs beneath its feet sent a cold spike of terror through my chest. Then it grinned, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched far too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Then, in an inhumanly fast movement, it sprinted towards us. Boris shoved me forward. Run! We bolted through the trees, our flashlights swinging wildly as we navigated the dark terrain. The sound of its pursuit was deafening, branches snapping, heavy footsteps slamming against the ground. Despite his size, Boris was fast. He pulled me along as we ran, weaving through the trees, trying to lose it, but it was gaining. Then a blood-curdling scream ripped through the night. I turned my head. Boris was gone. I stumbled to a halt, wheeling around with the flashlight. Boris? I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes. Then all of a sudden I heard gunshots, followed by a horrific screech. I panicked and took a few steps back when I heard something coming towards me at a high speed. I was ready to start running when Boris appeared from the darkness. Run! swinging his arms while sprinting at full speed. Without saying a word, we ran straight towards the truck and got in as fast as we could. "I think I got him good," Boris said. I didn't even respond to him, for I was busy getting us out of there as fast as possible. When we finally got out of the woods, I took a big sigh. Boris looked at me with big eyes and said, "What the heck just happened?" Nobody ever believed our story, but we know what we saw. My boyfriend, let's call him Jason, always made me feel safe. He was big, strong, and had this quiet confidence about him that made me believe nothing could hurt us as long as he was around. So when he suggested a weekend camping trip near Blackwater Lake, I didn't hesitate. We arrived in the afternoon, setting up camp in a small clearing right by the water's edge. The lake was stunning, smooth as glass, reflecting the towering pines that lined its shore. We had the place to ourselves, and as the sun set, the world felt peaceful. Jason got a fire going while I unpacked our gear. We spent the evening roasting hot dogs, drinking beer, and laughing about dumb things we'd done in college. It was perfect. Then, just as the last light faded from the sky, we heard something in the trees, a rustling sound. Not the wind, not an animal. Jason sat up straight, his expression shifting. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. "Probably just an animal." But then, a voice called out, "Evening, campers!" I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man stepped into the firelight. He was tall and wiry, dressed in a faded forest ranger uniform. Something about him immediately set me on edge. His clothes were dirty, frayed at the edges, and his badge looked wrong, too dull, too worn. His face was strange, his eyes too wide, like he'd never blinked enough. Jason stood, subtly shifting between me and the man. "Hey, didn't think there were any rangers out here this late." The man smiled, but there was something off about it. "Just making my rounds. You folks are deep in the woods, lots of dangers out here at night." Jason didn't move. "We'll be careful." The man just stood there, too long, not speaking, just staring. Then finally, he nodded. "You two have a good night." He turned and disappeared into the trees. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore before whispering, "That guy was weird." Jason didn't take his eyes off the tree line. "I don't think he's a real ranger." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" Jason hesitated. His uniform was wrong, and he wasn't carrying a radio. That was when I noticed something else. There had been no truck, no flashlight, no gear. He had just appeared. Jason saw the look on my face and forced a smile. "It's fine. We're fine. I'll stay up for a bit." I wanted to argue, but I was exhausted. I curled up in my sleeping bag while Jason sat by the fire staring into the dark. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Jason was shaking me awake. "Shh," he whispered, hand clamped over my mouth. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Close. Jason reached for the hatchet we'd brought for chopping firewood. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give us away. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. Then the zipper moved. Jason lunged. The tent exploded in chaos. The man was inside, hunched over us, a glint of metal in his hand, a knife. Jason tackled him, sending them both sprawling onto the ground outside. I scrambled out of the tent just in time to see Jason slam the man into the dirt, wrenching the knife from his grip. But the man was fast. Too fast. He slipped out from under Jason and laughed. That's when I saw his teeth. They were filed down to points. He wasn't just some creep. He was something else. Jason didn't hesitate. He grabbed the knife and drove it into the man's shoulder. The man let out a horrible, wet scream, but didn't fall. He just grinned. Jason yanked me to my feet. "Get in the car, now!" I sprinted through the trees, branches whipping against my skin. Behind me, I could hear Jason and the man still struggling. I didn't stop. I threw myself into the truck, fumbling with the keys. Jason barreled out of the darkness, blood running down his arm. He jumped in, slamming the door. The headlights lit up the trees. The man stood just at the edge of the light, watching us, still grinning. Then he waved. I gunned the engine, and we tore down the dirt road, not stopping until we reached the highway. We went straight to the nearest ranger station. They sent a team to check the site. They didn't find him, but they did find something else. A shallow pit, covered in branches. Inside it, a pile of bones. Human bones. They said it looked like it had been used recently. We never went camping again. The night caller. Some killers want to be found. Others, they want to watch you realize you'll never catch them. It was the summer of 1986, and I had been with the department for 6 years when the first call came in. A body found in a motel off Highway 12. Female, mid-20s. Not the first dead girl I'd seen, but something about this one was different. The manager said a man had paid for the room in cash. No name, no ID. Only stayed one night. The maid found a body the next morning. The girl was posed on the bed, hands folded over her stomach, neck slashed clean through. No sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds, like she never saw it coming, or worse, like she knew him. The next one came 2 weeks later, same setup, different motel. This time, I noticed something. The phone. The receiver had been taken off the hook. The manager said the guest had specifically asked for a room with a phone, not for calls, just for privacy. That's when it hit me. The killer wasn't just murdering these women, he was calling them. We checked records. None of the victims had known each other. No shared history, no connections. The only thing tying them together was the way they died and the phone. The coroner confirmed my suspicion. Each victim had a thin mark across their throat, a hesitation cut, like he liked to hear them beg. The press got wind of it fast. They called him the night caller. Said he was a phantom, striking at random. They were wrong. He wasn't random. He was getting closer. 3 months in, we got a break. A desk clerk at a roadside inn remembered something odd. Said a guest had checked in alone, but later requested extra towels for 2 people. We pulled the registration card. The name was fake. The address led nowhere. But the handwriting, it was deliberate, careful, like he wanted to be remembered. I stared at it for a long time. That was the first time I felt him, not as a suspect, as a presence, like he was watching me read his name and smiling. A week later, I was home late when my phone rang. I picked up. Silence. Then a click. Another girl turned up the next day. Room 212. Same pose, same cut, same goddamn phone off the hook. I stood there, staring at her lifeless eyes, and for the first time in my career, I felt rage. This bastard was playing with us. Worse, he was playing with me. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. At 3:17 a.m., my phone rang again. I answered, heart hammering. Silence. Then a voice, calm, almost gentle. "You're looking in the wrong places, detective." I sat up, gripping the receiver. "Who the hell is this?" Soft laughter. Then, Click. I traced the call. Payphone, 2 blocks from my apartment. He was close. I barely had time to grab my gun before another call came in. This time, from the station, another body, but not in a motel. This time, it was a house. The victim was different, older, male, and he wasn't posed. He was butchered, his stomach split wide, blood covering the walls. But the message wasn't in the gore, it was in the phone, off the hook, and smeared with my name. He knew me, had been following me, had been in my apartment. I felt sick. The bastard had turned the hunt around. I wasn't chasing him anymore. He was pulling me in. I spent the next few days barely sleeping, double-checking locks, watching shadows. Then, the break I needed. A woman named Diane came forward. She worked night shifts at a diner near the highway and had seen a guy come in regularly, always alone, always paid in cash. But one night, he'd left something behind, a matchbook from a motel, room 214. I got there first. I should have waited for backup. But I didn't. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room was spotless, except for the phone, off the hook, and the note beside it. For you, detective. I turned just as the closet door creaked open. A man stepped out, tall, calm, smiling, holding a knife. He knew I'd come alone, and he liked it. He moved first, fast, precise. The blade sliced across my arm before I got a shot off. The bullet tore through his shoulder, but he barely flinched, like pain meant nothing to him. We hit the floor, grappling. He was strong, too strong. But I had something he didn't. Rage. I smashed his head into the nightstand once, twice, 3 times. He went limp, breathing, but barely. And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes because he wasn't in control anymore. I was. The trial lasted 6 months. His real name was Daniel Briggs, former telemarketer, no record, no history of violence, until he snapped, killed 12 women and 1 man, his own father. The jury put him away for life, but even in court, he smiled at me like he knew something I didn't. I moved out of state a year later, got a new number, new job, new life. But sometimes the phone starts ringing at night, and all I hear is silence. But I know he's smiling. Retirement was 2 weeks away. After 34 years on the force, I was ready. Ready to leave behind the paperwork, the night shifts, the bodies. My wife had already booked a little cabin up north, just me, her, and the quiet. But then the call came in. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. All units be advised. Suspect escaped from Black Ridge Asylum. Considered extremely dangerous. Black Ridge. That place was a fortress. You didn't just walk out. Then they said his name, and my stomach turned to ice. Michael Grayson. I knew that name. I had arrested him. 20 years ago, Grayson butchered a family in her home. Not just killed, tore them apart. The only survivor was an 8-year-old girl who hid in the closet. She never spoke about what she saw. The courts sent Grayson to Black Ridge instead of death row. Now, he was out. Most of the younger guys rushed to roadblocks. But I knew Grayson. He wasn't running. He had unfinished business. And I had a sick feeling I knew exactly where he was going. The house. The one where he left a job half done. It had been abandoned for years. Still had the crime scene tape on the door, curling and yellowed. I pulled up, killed my headlights, and gripped my revolver. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then a light flickered upstairs. Someone was inside. I stepped out, my knees aching from too many years on the job. Every instinct screamed, "Get back up," but there was no time. I wasn't about to let that bastard slip away. The front door was open. I stepped in, my boots creaking on the warped floorboards. The air stank like rot and mildew. Then I saw it, on the wall, a fresh drawing in red. Crude stick figures, 3 big ones, 1 small one, a family. Underneath, in jagged letters, "I never forgot you." My blood went cold. I knew who it was for. The girl, the one who got away. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I raised my gun and moved toward the stairs. Slow, steady. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. The only light spilled from a room at the end. I stepped closer. The house was dead silent. Something was wrong. The floorboards ahead were dusty except for a single, fresh footprint. He was waiting. The room was empty. Just a bare mattress on the floor and a phone off the hook. Then I heard it, a breath behind me. I turned just as the knife came down. Pain exploded in my shoulder. I fired blindly, but Grayson was fast. He hit me like a truck, slamming me into the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. I barely had time to duck as the blade flashed again, carving through the air where my throat had been. He was grinning like he was enjoying this. I grabbed a lamp and smashed it across his face. He staggered back, blood dripping from his cheek, but still smiling. "Been waiting a long time for this, officer," he said, wiping the blood from his chin. "You took me away before I could finish." His eyes flickered toward the gun on the floor. I moved first. We hit the floor, rolling. The knife sliced into my side, but I barely felt it. My fingers wrapped around his throat, pressing harder, harder. His face darkened. His grin faded for the first time. He looked afraid. Then his hand darted toward the knife. I grabbed the gun and fired. He slumped against the wall, eyes wide in shock. His lips moved like he wanted to say something, maybe a final word, a curse. But no sound came out, just blood, a lot of blood. It gushed from his mouth in thick, bubbling streams, pooling at his feet. His body twitched violently, fingers clawing at the air. His own blood smeared across his chest as he fought to breathe. I watched as his body went still. The eerie smile still stretched across his face. Even in death, he looked like he was laughing. A sound caught my attention, something wet. I looked down, my own blood, a lot of it, spilling from my side, soaking my shirt, pooling with Grayson's. My vision blurred. The room spun. I felt cold. The rookie who found me looked shaken. "Jesus, Sarge," he said, helping me up. "You should be dead." I looked at Grayson's lifeless eyes, then at the wall, at the words scrawled beneath the stick figures. "I never forgot you." My hand was slick with blood as I wiped my mouth, breath shallow, pain sharp and real. I muttered, "Neither did I." I've been a cop for 12 years. I've seen things that would make most people lose sleep. Crime scenes that stick with you, eyes that have long since lost their light. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night. It started with a call at 2:37 a.m. A woman reported screaming coming from the house next door. Said she heard banging, a man's voice, something that didn't sound human. Then silence. Dispatch sent us to check it out. I was with my partner, Martinez. We've been riding together for 5 years. Good guy, experienced, never one to spook easily. The house was old, 2 stories, half the windows boarded up. No car in the driveway. The street was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your stomach turn. We stepped onto the porch, our boots creaking against the rotten wood. I knocked. "Police! Anyone home?" Nothing. Martinez turned the knob. Unlocked. That was our first mistake. We stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the dark. The air was wrong. Stale, damp, thick with the kind of rot that comes from something long dead. The living room was empty, furniture covered in dust, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling, but the floor scratched up, deep grooves like something had been dragged. That was our second mistake. Martinez gestured to the staircase. "Upstairs?" I nodded. We moved slow, guns drawn, the wooden steps groaning under our weight. Then a noise, a quiet, wet sound from the end of the hall. We followed it, past doors that stood slightly open, the shadows inside too deep. The smell was worse up here, something pungent, metallic. We reached the last door. It was open just a crack. Martinez went first, pushing it open with his foot, and that's when the smell hit us. Blood. It was everywhere. The walls, the floor, soaked into the mattress of a rotten bed. In the middle of the room was a chair, and strapped to that chair was a man, or what was left of him. His skin peeled back in strips, his eyes gone, empty sockets staring at nothing, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. Martinez swore under his breath, "Jesus Christ!" I stepped closer, my flashlight shaking. The blood was fresh. Whoever did this wasn't far. Then a creak behind us. We spun around and saw the closet door closing. Someone was inside. Martinez moved first, gun raised. "Come out, now!" Silence. Then a giggle, high-pitched. Wrong. My stomach dropped. Martinez nodded at me. I gripped the knob, counted to 3, then yanked it open. Empty. Just darkness. Shelves of old coats. Then hands. Coming from the shadows. Grabbing Martinez, pulling him in. He screamed. I lunged forward, grabbing his vest, trying to yank him back. But something else was pulling him deeper. Something strong. Something I couldn't see. Martinez's face contorted in pain. He gasped, choked. His body jerked violently. I caught a flash of teeth in the dark. And then he was gone, ripped into the closet. The door slammed shut. I stumbled back, my hands slick with his blood. My flashlight flickered, the shadows around me moving. I grabbed my radio, my voice barely working. "Officer down! I need backup, now!" Static. Then in the silence, a voice. "Help me." Martinez's voice. But wrong, twisted, mocking. I backed out of the room, heart slamming against my ribs. The hallway felt longer. The house was changing. The walls groaned. The doors creaked. Footsteps echoed behind me, but there was no one there. I ran down the stairs, through the front door, into the cold night. I didn't stop until I reached the car. By the time backup arrived, the house was different. No skibidi blood, no body, no sign that Martinez had ever been there. They searched, found nothing. I was forced to give a statement, forced to tell my captain that I had lost my partner in an abandoned house. The next day, I drove back alone. I had to. I had to see if it was real. The house wasn't there. I swear to God, it wasn't there. Just an empty lot. Grass, dirt, a few broken bricks, no house, no blood, no Martinez. They wrote it off as stress, a breakdown. I was put on leave, forced into therapy, told to rest and recover. But I know what I saw. And Martinez, he's still out there, somewhere, or something wearing his face is.